Welcome everyone to the PI Education October webinar. It's been a crazy busy year here at PI Education. So the monthly webinar has been on hiatus for a bit, but now we're back with a fantastic guest. Leah Wietholter is joining us today. Leah is a certified fraud examiner, a forensic accountant, a private investigator, and she's the owner of Workman Forensics in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a firm that specializes in forensic accounting and fraud investigations. They help their clients follow patterns and find missing money. Leah is also the host of a popular podcast, The Investigation Game. In the podcast, she interviews fellow investigators who use logic and reasoning as an investigative superpower. You can find that podcast at workmanforensics.com/the podcast. Earlier this year, Leah's new book came out, and it is called Data Sleuth, using data in forensic accounting engagements and fraud investigations. It's a great guide to how a forensic accountant analyzes data to uncover fraud. And she writes about ethics too, how a fraud investigator should reserve judgment and focus on fact, especially when testifying as an expert witness. This week, we published a great excerpt from her book in Pursuit magazine. It's about a fraud case she worked that forced her to see suspects in a whole new light. Lots of profound insights there about humility and empathy when we interview subjects. Don't miss it. That's at pursuitmag.com, and the story is called The Case of the Non-Existent Inventory. Leah, thank you for that excerpt, number one, and thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get into this business? And I understand you did a little stint at the FBI as well, which is like uber cool for all of us investigators that have no law enforcement background.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to be an investigator from the time I was 12 years old. So that really shaped my career path. And yes, I learned about being an investigator from murder mystery books or just mystery books in general as a kid, and also from a radio drama I listened to as a kid that just really introduced me to this world. And so I chose my career path and even my college major based on how the FBI was hiring at the time. I started off pre-law, but that had a lot more reading. I needed more numbers in my life. I couldn't take that many classes with so much reading. So I switched my major to accounting, and then I had the opportunity to I was selected for the honors internship with the FBI between my junior and senior year. And then I was able to return back to Tulsa to continue that internship under the direction of a forensic accountant at the resident agency here in Tulsa. They really spoiled me. I ended up being able to testify before grand jury. I did primarily data entry, so I'm focusing on the highlights here. The majority of my days were just data entry. Um, of bank statements and credit card statements, but they let me help prep them for grand jury testimony. Then I eventually testified. I got to write reports, and I just had a really great time working with them.
You know, there is a definite cool factor to saying I worked at the FBI, but the chance to get to work on prosecutions and prep for trial and do grand jury, that is amazing. That's really cool. And a lot of FBI agents don't get that right out of the box. So that's fantastic. How did you end up launching Workman Forensics?
All right, so I finished the internship. It was just a 2-year internship at the FBI, and I was looking to get experience in other areas. And I'll just be completely transparent. I think I even talk about it in the book, but I took the first phase of the FBI agent exam when I turned 23, and I took that test within a few weeks, maybe a few months later. And I did not pass the first phase. It was a personality and decision-making test, and so I like to make the joke because it makes me handle it a little better, but I like to make the joke that the FBI didn't like my personality or my 23-year-old decision-making skills. So I could have stayed at the bureau and worked in a variety of positions, of course, as support employees, which are great jobs. But I decided, since I was an accountant, I would be a quote unquote good accountant and get some public accounting experience. So I ended up working in tax, while I was at this firm, they started getting forensic accounting engagement requests. And they said, "Oh, Leah worked for the FBI, and we have a manager with his certified fraud examiner's credential. You guys can figure this out." So we ended up starting a forensic accounting division. But the thing about working in public accounting and my experience working with tax and also, this newer division was that I still had to maintain tax busy season and those types of hours. So I kind of ended up with this year-long busy season, and it just got to be too much. So I decided to leave, and I worked with a headhunter. And let me tell you, when your first job out of college is with the FBI and doing all the fun things I did there, becoming a controller or a CFO just was not exciting. So, it was actually the headhunter that said, "Leah, I'm never gonna find a job that you love in the accounting world, so what if you just started your own practice?" So I called my mom and my mentor from the bureau, and they said, "What's the worst that could happen?" And I said, "I go get a controller job." And they said, "All right." So that's when I got started. That's when I became a private investigator, because Workman Forensics is a private investigation firm. I wasn't a CPA at the time, and so that's how I ended up launching Workman Forensics.
And did you get your CFE ticket during the process of starting that business or after you started the business?
I had actually already become a CFE while working in public accounting when we started that division. And then, but once I was on my own, I wasn't working for a licensed firm anymore, under a CPA, licensed CPA firm. So that's why I chose the PI
Okay.
licensing route. Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. That's a it's a fantastic origin story. One of the things we like to do at Pursuit Magazine is get investigators to kind of tell their origin story, and yours is fascinating. I grew up watching Magnum PI and Simon and all those shows. I don't know what radio program you're talking about, but as a kid, my grandfather would put on radio dramas and stuff like that. So, yeah, fascinating stuff. Congratulations, by the way. Your book just came out last April, right?
Yes, just a few months ago. Yeah.
So how is it? Kim Green, the kind of main primary top dog editor at Pursuit Magazine, is a writer, and she's worked finishing up her second book. But how did you find that process of the book launch, and how's that going?
Yeah, I think it's going great. It was published by Wiley Publishers, so they decided how, what kind of series they were going to put it in, and so this is in their like financial professional series. So it looks like a textbook, but I don't think it reads like a textbook. So I think that uh, kind of explaining that to audiences, it just looks more intimidating than it is. So, but I think it's been going really well. And I personally love it. I mean, sales have been better than I thought they would be. Just, I don't, you don't know how many people are going to find this interesting. But what's really cool are just all the connections that it's given me. I spoke at the Global ACFE conference this year, and, while I was there, I had posted on LinkedIn like, "Hey, if you're gonna be at the conference, let's do an escape room. Like, if you follow me, let's do an escape room." And so somebody reached out and said, "I listened to your podcast and somebody gifted me your book, and so I would just really like to meet you, and I'll do the escape room too." So it just has created some really cool, like, professional friendships, and then also it's just really great, honestly, to have what I'll call a manifesto, even just for my team, that we've put together this process over however, 8 plus years, and now it's all in one place. And so now whenever I have new team members start, they get to start off by reading my book. And my words, instead of saying, read this, we take some of Tiffany Couch's stuff and we take some of Tracy Conan's stuff, and now it's all in one place and using our process.
That is fantastic. And the ACFE conference, for those of you in the room that aren't familiar with the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, um, you know, it is, to my mind, it's one of the best organizations, if you're a private investigator, to give you basically instant credibility. The CFE exam is not the easiest exam I've ever taken. It's not the hardest, but it's certainly not the easiest. And it's a bit onerous to maintain that CFE designation, but it is good, and you meet some amazing people from around the world. And Leah and I were talking before we started the webinar. I do. I have a background in real estate appraisal, and one of the jokes I tell is, why do people become real estate appraisers? Well, it's because they don't have enough personality to be accountants. Um, the thing about the CFE group is there are a lot of accountants in the room, right?
Mhm.
There's just a
Yeah.
ton of them, but they're interesting people. It's a fun
Yeah.
group to hang out with. I really enjoy those conferences. So your book is a crazy detailed guide for veterans and newbies alike. As you said, you have new hires come in, you have them read your book. But before we get into the book, let's have a few definitions of terms and talk about your specialty a little bit. First of all, so when I go to parties or any kind of social event and people ask me what I do not usually tell them I'm a real estate appraiser. I tell them I'm a private investigator.
Absolutely.
What do you tell people you do?
I tell them that I own a forensic accounting firm. Yeah.
You don't lead with I'm a private investigator. I used to work for the
I
FBI.
I don't. And it's funny, just by saying forensic accounting or, firm or forensic accountant, whichever I am choosing to use, they'll always just stop because it was never the answer they were expecting, right?
Right, right, right. And we were talking earlier about the business of forensic accounting. People have some misconceptions about what that actually means.
It's true.
Talk to me about
Yeah.
that a little bit.
Yeah, so forensic accounting to me, I mean, based on this experience, working under a forensic accountant for the FBI and then now over the last 15 years, forensic accounting technically means accounting that can be used in a court of law or accounting for a court of law. So it is one of many litigation support services. And forensic accounting, from a practice standpoint, has become a very detailed approach to forensic accounting. This goes beyond an audit. So the ACFE that you were just talking about says that fraud happens, based on their research, fraud happens in about 5% of a company's revenue.
Mhm.
Well, an audit isn't going to look at every dollar, right? And if fraud is only happening in that 5%, a lot of times fraud doesn't even rise to the level of materiality for an auditor to even see it. So because of that, forensic accounting really dives into, this is oversimplification, but dives into that 5%, right? Looks at those details and addresses very specific concerns on a very detailed, granular level.
Okay. And that covers the next question that I had kind of lined up, which is, how are forensic accountants different from auditors? It's not the same job.
It is not.
Okay.
And I think a really big distinction between the two as well is that auditors really are looking at the financial statements as a whole. Forensic accountants are addressing specific problems or what we call investigative concerns or investigative priorities. So um, I like to tell people that anytime they're missing money, we can help them. So we can help them find missing money. And then I also like to explain that uh, we're not going to look at, I mean, all of our focus is on what are they concerned about, and then we're going to look at the details of that. An auditor is really looking at these financial statements as a whole, and is something being misrepresented in a material way to the user. So it's just two totally different, the skill sets can definitely overlap, but it's just for two completely distinct purposes in my mind.
Right. So auditors are looking kind of at a global picture, and you're looking for needles in haystacks.
Yes.
Yeah. Um,
Related to very specific problems.
right. So you mentioned you help people find missing money. I'm missing a lot of money, and I'd like you to help me find it. I have no idea where it is.
Yeah, well, so I actually spoke last week at an attorney conference for attorneys, and I told them, and I tell this to my clients, forensic accounting isn't magic. I just know where to go look. I
Right.
know the most common places that people hide money, and so I'm going to go look in those details.
So that leads into the perfectly to the next kind of notion I wanted to talk about, which is like, I'm dyslexic, so I have some struggles with reading at times, especially later in the day. But like words, I can almost see words as images, so I get through that. I've learned it, but numbers are a problem for me. I have to call them out loud in order to keep track of them. But the question is, it'd be awful easy to get lost in all that data.
Yep.
So
It it can be.
I think the thing I took away from your book is having a systematic approach is the way to do this.
Yes. I'm extremely biased since I wrote a book about a process to do that, but I really don't know how you can do that from a private investigative standpoint, right? Like, if you're federal government working for a law enforcement agency, you still have budgets and things you've got to consider, right? But we're talking about our clients' dollars are being spent to help them solve a problem, help them find missing money related to a particular problem.
Right.
So, having we can't just say, "Oh, we want to do the entire gamut of things," right? We need to address their problems without chasing all these, I call them rabbit trails. Joe Irvin says she says rabbit holes, whatever they are. But, without chasing all these other things, we need to be able to identify what's the data that we need and then help address the problem with that data.
So the book is called Data Sleuth, and that phrase could refer to a person, the investigator herself, but you're also using it to define this process you've developed. Tell us about the process. What is it, and why is it needed?
Yeah, so this process is something that, like I mentioned earlier, we've developed over the last 8 years, and it really takes our team and anyone who has adopted it from the client intake and the case planning process all the way to findings. And the whole purpose of this is to identify what are the problems that our client is looking to solve. And I hope that I'm clear in the book. I think that I am about that we want to provide information related to a client's concerns, problems, their investigative priorities. And that's what we want to address. We're not looking to find an answer or the answer the client wants. So, and the way that we can do this is by being objective and following a process every time. So, by starting with understanding what are the client's concerns up front, what other risks might exist that they haven't thought about. So, for example, maybe a business owner is concerned that somebody's stealing money through payroll. But then through our conversation, we want to ask them about other risks. Well, could they also write checks? Did they receive deposits? So then all of these things lead into our case plan, because I think that every case should have a case plan. That's how we can stay focused and on budget. And really, this process, yes, it makes it easier, I think, for an investigator to wrap their arms around a case. It makes it easier to manage other investigators. But it also, um, and it just helps us stay on budget. But at the end of the day, we're also providing great customer and client service. So we're going to create that case plan. By identifying the case plan, I then know, okay, in order to answer these questions or to address these investigative priorities, I'm going to need to perform this kind of analysis. And then to work that type of analysis, I need this type of data. And then I can start looking at too, do I need to bring in additional investigators who maybe are proficient at OSINT, or maybe I need to bring in some investigators that really love doing evidence seeking interviews, things like that. But it's all pointed towards the goal of being able to communicate very clear data focused findings at the end to address those investigative priorities at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think, you said something in the first part of that answer that kind of hit me, and you said you're looking at the investigative needs and the process, not necessarily to get to an answer, because I think at the end of the day, you could end up in kind of a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy situation where you know the answer, but you don't know the question. And part of, I think what I'm hearing is this is along the lines of developing a scope of work, and your process helps you develop that scope of work. Here are the questions that we need to address. Here are the things we're trying to find. We need these tools to get those things done.
Exactly.
And in doing that, I think it seems to me you probably have a better idea of what you need to charge your client. It helps you in the bidding and the billing process. I'm guessing.
Yes, I think so. I will say, because we can use this process for a variety of cases, because we could work anything from an estate and trust case. I don't work a ton of divorce anymore, but divorce matters or an embezzlement or a partnership dispute or a bankruptcy or receivership. I mean, there's all types of different types of cases that we can work with this process. But yes, within those different categories, we can kind of estimate, okay, we think this would be a good budget for this or something.
Right.
When it's a predictable, okay, we understand what we're going to do here. Now, sometimes we get surprised by the information we're provided. And my my best example of this was a child support case. And I told this person how much I would charge for it because it just based on, she said her child's father made about $17,000 a year from a lawn mowing business. And so I just said, I'll do this for X amount. This was years ago. And I don't fix fee anymore, but I fixed fee this. And he ended up with like 6 to 8 different bank accounts. So I knew the analysis that needed to be performed. I had no idea we would find 6 to 8 bank accounts to analyze. But at the end of the day, she had a huge win. He actually was making over 6 figures a year because that lawn mowing business was maybe some lawns being mowed, but it was also a weed business. So
So he's cutting weeds and selling weed.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Well, chapter one is all about building your practice. And I want to step back a little bit because, I think these webinars are useful for people to get their head around a new possible avenue of investigative work that they might consider doing. But it's also useful for, I think you started off as a solo entrepreneur, right?
I did.
And a lot of us in the investigative business did that same thing. So the question of how to grow, when do you realize you need to grow? Kind of talk to me about how you dealt with figuring out, oh, geez, I do need to grow my business. How did that process work out?
Yeah, when I left public accounting, I had been a staff accountant, so I didn't really have a lot of I had no business development experience and I knew no one in town. So all of that was a learning experience. But my plan was once I get to know some people, I will just work some small divorce cases, maybe some, and that was really my plan. Just if I can just survive off of this, that would be great. My very first case that I received information and could start billing was a $1.5 million embezzlement from a nonprofit. And I thought, and I had a very quick turnaround because the attorney wanted to have a temporary injunction hearing and have a restraining order and stuff. And so I was like, okay, well, I can't do all of this on my own. We were looking at 10 years of information, and this was pre like bank scan or money thumb or these like data processing software, bank statement software.
Right.
That did not exist at the price point I could afford at the time, especially. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I need to start thinking about this. If this is representative of the type of cases I'm going to be getting, I need to start thinking about how can I plug people in to help me. And so within 3 months, I had actually had to hire several people and I had to move into an office. My plan was to work from my dining room table, I mean, and then within 3 months, I had to find office space and all of this. So I feel like a lot of like growth and even just the number of team members I've had, and they have been employees, not contractors over this time, it kind of ebbs and flows. I mean, and it's really kind of responsive to what we're working on. But with the Data Sleuth process, that has really helped me to retain, like train and build a team and retain a team that I think the person that's been here the least has worked with me for 3 to 4 years, almost 4 years.
Okay.
So, and I find that to be a huge win in
Yeah.
this business. So, my longest running employee, she's been with me for over 6 years. So, I don't know. Having the Data Sleuth process has really helped me to retain that because I can set expectations. We know what our roles are, and we can go from there.
I love it. So yeah, I think one of the problems that a lot of private investigators have is a lot of us do work from our dining room tables, right? I spend a lot of my time on the road, so I'm working out of various lawyers' offices around the country. But growing too fast can be tricky for small business owners, and we've all dealt with the problem of how to grow, when to grow, even whether or not to grow. Brian
Mhm.
Willingham, one of the guys that contributes a lot to Pursuit Magazine, is a fantastic private investigator. One of the things I love about Brian is he's very willing to share his own experiences and be transparent about those things. Um, and he talks about the potential dangers of growth and growing too fast. How did you think about hiring employees and growing your business? And what kind of, did you have any problems that stick out in your head?
Yes. So, considering I had been a staff accountant, so I had never managed anyone except in college when I worked at a retirement community in the dining room, and I was the supervisor for a brief stint. So, until I started working for the bureau. So, uh, I had not managed people, and so I was bringing people on. I didn't really have systems, and I would just say, "Can you, enter this bank statement or the stack of bank statements into Excel?" And then I would just think whatever they give me is better than what like better than staying up, 24 hours a day.
Sure.
And so I just accepted that. Um, at about year 3 in my business, I I just knew that I was frustrated, but also my employees were frustrated because they wanted to help, but I couldn't articulate how to have them help more. And so I would just say, I don't know, I just have to look at it. I don't know, I just have to look at it. And so um, for different reasons, employees just left. And none of it was bad, but by year 3, I had no employees, and I remember telling my IT consultant that I still have to this day, I said, "I'm not hiring anyone else until I figure this out." Well, I have not mastered it by any stretch, but I just really started thinking about if I hire employees again, what positions do I really want them to fill? And I decided that based on what are the things that I dread doing within these investigations, and then start there, which for me, it was data entry. So I started with that. And then it kind of built from there.
So, the thing you're talking about, so your book is about a process for investigations, but the thing we're talking about right now is kind of business process and how to think about hiring people. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking specifically of Mark and Wendy Mernan, who have done some writing for Pursuit Magazine, and they've gone through the process of detailing business processes for private investigators. So, for those of you out there in the crowd, and I'm going to take a minute to go back to the clean screen for me because it's right at the halfway point of the webinar, and there are a couple things I have to do. Number one, for those of you that want to kind of get your hands around your business and actually run a business, um, I can recommend this book. It's a great book. It helps you get your head around some of those issues and some of the things we were talking about just now. Mark and Wendy Mernan's books on business process are another good resource. Um, I'm Hal Humphreys. This is the PI Education monthly-ish webinar. We have been remiss in getting the webinar done lately, and I apologize for that, but we're back and we're going to stick to it for the next several months. It is the month of October, which is, in my mind, one of the most exciting months of the year because Halloween is coming up at the end of the month. And Halloween, I don't know if you knew this or not, but Halloween is actually called Halloween. It's my birthday. So we're going to give a coupon code out this week. The coupon code is Spooky CE 2022. Get you 10% off of any course you like. We would love it if you hopped over to PI Education and got some CE done in the process. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say take a minute, go down, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It doesn't cost you anything at all, and it helps us out quite a bit. And we like having that interaction. So, again, I'm Hal Humphreys, the host of this here webinar, and I'm joined today by Leah Wietholter, author of Data Sleuth, um, using data in forensic accounting engagements and fraud investigations. We'll tell you where to buy this book. The easiest place I can think of is Amazon. If you go to Amazon, search for this title, you'll find it, buy a copy of it. But Leah is here with us today. Leah, thank you so much again for being here. I'm tickled. I'm enjoying the heck out of this. Um, CFEs and non-CFEs should appreciate the systematic approach to financial investigations, complete with lots of case studies and takeaways. Leah, one thing I enjoyed about the book is how you wove in so many case studies, and I think that's so. You said earlier it looks kind of like a textbook, and yeah, I mean the publisher does what the publisher does, but readers love stories about actual cases, and I think we as human beings learn more when we're reading about actual cases. So how did you choose the case studies, and is there one in particular that sticks in your mind, one that surprised you or taught you something important?
Yeah, so I've worked well over 150 cases in my career at this point. I still need to count. I don't know. Anyway, so I've worked over 150 cases, and um, just I would choose case studies that I thought went along with whatever part of the process or struggle I was trying to communicate, and hopefully the following win in the book. And so one of the case studies actually in chapter 3, I think fits what you're asking for. And it's called, I've got to read it. It's called The Case of the Cashback Payroll Scheme. And this one was about a business owner who didn't run the day-to-day of his business. He had, for any accountants out there, he had a really good internal controls set up. He had a CEO, CFO. He had an external accountant who was reviewing his bookkeeping. He had time entries separate from others. I mean, it was just he had um, he had great internal controls set up. So he was in another part of the state running the business he wanted to run. And he found out through a whistleblower, one of the employees, that the CEO was overpaying a certain group of employees, about 6 to 8 employees, was overpaying them in payroll. And then she would leave an envelope on their desk with a certain dollar amount written. And they knew that, let's say if she had overpaid them by $1,000, she would leave an envelope on their desk with $500 written on the front. And they were to, after payroll cleared, they were to go and get the cash and put it in this envelope and give it back to her. So this is over and over. So this owner finds out about this, right? And I had just purchased, shortly before this case came in, some data analytics software that we still use to this day. And I told him, I said, okay, we can definitely look into the people that this whistleblower identified as receiving this money and being part of this scheme. But I don't really trust people. So I trust data. So what if we look at all of your payroll data that we need to look at? And we had some different data points we wanted to see. And I said, let me just run it for all the employees. And he said, okay, sounds great. Well, wouldn't you know that when we were running this information, we did find the scheme, we quantify how much they had stolen in total, but my whistleblower had been part of it and had been cut out. And so several takeaways from this case, and this was several $100,000 that was stolen in this way. And poor guy, there were so many schemes on this case. We actually interviewed him on the podcast, and we have anyway, it's a case study that he also tells his story on our podcast, which is really interesting. But on this particular portion of the case, it was just really an interesting takeaway, because theoretically, I had always thought if I could look at all of the employees, then we don't have to worry about, oh, am I picking on or cherry picking, certain employees and of ignoring others. But by using a data approach to this and saying, hey, look, I can, in the same amount of time, I can run these tests on everyone instead of just the known employees. And then we can really find out who was part of this. Plus, it would corroborate her story and wherever that went afterwards. So that's one of my favorites.
I love it. Reading this book, and you seem like a very transparent person, right? Just
Right.
talking to you, so which I think is great. But we can see you evolving as a financial investigator, as an entrepreneur, as the book unfolds. You build your business, you learn new techniques, you even change your mind about things. One of the things I loved is this excerpt in Pursuit was how you interview with the subject, you called him Jeff, made you think about the people you interview in a whole new way. So, first, set up the story and tell us about that case.
Yeah. So I was actually working with a very experienced private investigator on this case. And he had gotten the call and he asked me if I would come and help him with this. And essentially, what we learned was that Jeff, he was a salesman for a product distribution company. And so he would go out and sell these products. Well, he had access in the system where he could show that he had sold products that didn't exist. And then whenever he sold those products, he would obviously get his commission, but he also set himself up under a friend's company as a vendor. And when he set himself up as the vendor, he was not only selling products that didn't exist and getting that commission and showing it on that end, but also he was getting paid as a fake vendor. And so his friend's company would receive the check from his employer and then would pay him the funds. So, yeah. So that was the whole scheme. It was over $600,000
Oh my.
and it was a mess.
The thing that I find about fraud cases and small business especially, the numbers can be astonishing. I've seen small businesses get built for several $100,000, and it's easy as an investigator, as a prosecutor, to think, "Oh, I would never do something like that. That's just who does something like that." But the point that I liked about the Jeff story is it's a good reminder to us as private investigators to think about the notion of empathy and, thinking about things from a different mindset. Tell me what you learned about empathy and judgment from your interviews with Jeff.
Yeah, so like I said, I was working with this experienced PI and his like claim to fame was, working a case and then he actually would get a lot of confessions. And so that's why he was hired on this case. So he asked me, he had done an interview with the company's HR director and Jeff had come clean. So this was a second interview where he said, I want you to go through this list and like, let's see if Jeff will confess to this dollar amount. Let's and I had a lot of questions. Inventory records from a data perspective, and especially in this company, can be really messy and really complicated. So to have his cooperation was going to help speed up my process and reduce the fees for the employer. So as I just remember prepping for this and I thought, I'm going to go in and, I'd worked with this PI before and I knew his approach and he's really straightforward. So I'm like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to, just ask him about these things and just, I don't know. And having worked at the Bureau and gone on interviews there, you're dealing with law enforcement and just seeing the way they would confront things. So I'm all ready. And Jeff shows up and he sits down and the PI I'm working with was really great at just getting somebody comfortable at the beginning, of course. And Jeff says, yeah, I'm happy to be here. I have $1.70 in my account or something close to that. And we were like, what? And he's like, oh yeah, I have no money, but I am here to help. I am here to help. He ends up telling this whole story that he was so glad he was finally caught because he'd been living with this anxiety that he was going to be found out all this time. His whole purpose was that he had promised his kids, he didn't go to college. He had promised his kids that they would go to college, that he would pay for it. And he was making sure that they had everything, cars and food money. And just everything. But looking him in the eyes and sitting there face to face with him, my whole approach changed because I thought, what if I'm in this situation at some point in my life? Could I make the same decision? I love to say that I wouldn't, but when we talk about the fraud triangle a lot, pressure as CFEs. So pressure or incentive, and then having an opportunity to relieve that pressure, and then how can we rationalize it? There's a lot of things in my life I can rationalize. So I think that is like that's like the scariest piece, I think, to the fraud triangle. And so I just remember just seeing him as human and that, oh my gosh, he made a mistake and this is a big mistake and it's a criminal mistake. And it just changed my whole approach. And one of my favorite things about this case is that from that interview, so he had already had one interview, he was willing to come back and give another interview. And then he said, yeah, Leah, if you run across anything else that you need on this case, just call me. Here's my cell number. And I thought, yeah, right. Right. And, but as part of this conversation, I was very empathetic. I was very friendly is a weird word, but we're on the same team kind of thing. Like, just help me figure this out for your employer, help you get the best deal, that type of thing. And he said, here's my cell number. You can call me back. Well, a couple weeks later, I'm putting together the numbers and I run into another situation, another pattern in the data that didn't look familiar. And I thought, I'm just going to give Jeff a call. So I call him. Sure enough, he answers. I said, this is what I'm seeing in the data. And he goes, oh, I forgot. I did that too. And he helped me. He helped me.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, so a lot of private investigators come from a law enforcement background. I do not, but you do. And a lot of private investigators do. So there's this that you come to the job with a prosecutorial mindset. Some of us do. And it can be real easy to get jaded over the course of a career, and to think that all these people are out doing horrible bad things, and I would never do such things. But at the end of the day, I think it's best for us as investigators. I'm called a fact investigator, and I like to focus on the facts and not the judgment part. And as we were talking before the webinar, most of my cases are criminal cases that involve bodily injury or death, and somebody's charged with murder. And yeah, I can say right here, right now, I would never murder anybody. But I've not been in those situations. You know what I'm saying? So, the fraud thing, you can commit murder and people can understand it. You take somebody's money away from them, they get really upset. But I think at the end of the day, the gist of it is, as investigators, our job is to focus on the facts. And one of the folks in the comment section said something about avoiding bias is key. Focusing on facts helps you avoid any biases if you're just looking at the facts. So the data sleuth process, I think, is kind of perfect for that. It's also a blueprint to effective financial investigations. Along those lines, who's this book written for? Who's your intended audience?
It was really me. I wanted to write the book that I was looking for when I first started my business back in 2010. So that was really who I was writing this for. What did I need to know? And that's why I follow so much of my journey. I mean, it really is like this timeline through the book of how I just, the struggles, the good, the bad, the ugly, what I struggled with, what I discovered, how I tried to fix that, how I tried to make things better.
I love it. And for me, taking the time to sit down and put my thoughts on the page and organize them on the page actually helps me get my head around them better. So I
Yeah.
think when you say the audience is you, that makes perfect sense. How does your data sleuth method help financial investigators approach cases? How can they use the exercises and worksheets in the book?
So since this book didn't exist when I first started my business, I had to, and my strategy was, if I can learn from other people's experiences and learn from their cases that they've worked, then maybe when I get the phone calls, I can at least connect those dots. So if I had heard a story from an investigator about a payroll scheme, when I get called about a payroll scheme, or somebody suspects payroll, then I can at least have somewhere to start. And so that was my goal in sharing so many case stories and examples. And then I just think, and we talk about this here a lot and on the podcast, that we think our case planning process is our secret sauce. And so, just really wrapping our heads around, what is the client needing? What are those investigative priorities? What do we need in order to answer those? And being upfront about that information doesn't even exist. So I wanted to provide exercises and worksheets to really reinforce that, because it's difficult whenever you're first starting out as an investigator, to like try something out on a client. That just feels weird and wrong. And so just to have that practical hands-on approach was really important here. And that's what we also offer in like our game-based trainings. Like this is a safe place to try it and fail and learn from that failure, and then also have ideas that will help us provide even better service to clients.
I love it. All right. So, what if you were to talk to someone? You said, "I want your takeaway to be this or this." What do you want people to take away from this?
I would really like for readers to take away the confidence to work financial investigations. Like that they can apply this process and apply this train of thought, because financial investigations feel overwhelming at the beginning, especially if it's not what you normally do. Because I know that private investigators will get calls about embezzlement or missing inventory or things like that. And by providing, hey, these are your basic data sources, and they are the same on every case because every case feels different,
Mhm.
right? Like the problems feel different. But it then, if we can actually put it into a process and put that case plan together, then we start seeing that, oh, yeah, the story is different, but the evidence is pretty similar throughout all of these cases. If it's a business, we're dealing with bank statements, credit card statements, payable reports, and some accounting records. And so learning what are the most reliable, what do we use those for? My hope is that by understanding these like building blocks of a financial investigation, that more people will feel confident, whether they're an accountant or maybe a PI that has typically done interviews or OSINT or something, would feel more confident about taking on these types of investigations.
And along those lines, I'm assuming. Well, I shouldn't assume this at all. If somebody gets a book and they tie into a case and they get over their head, they're just like they're in the tall grass. Um, I mean, would you take an email from somebody saying, "Hey, I need a little help"?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Email, LinkedIn. We have a lot of resources for investigators. We've put together a professional collaborative. And so, yeah, all of those things.
I love it. So, as I said earlier, like sometimes writing things down helps me get my head around things and helps me a lot of times learn something new in the process. What did you learn about this work or about yourself while writing this book?
I learned that I'm not in as many of the details as I used to be, because when I sat down to write this book and working with a publisher, I had a word count. And I thought, oh, I can write this whole chapter about this process. And I'd write away. And the goal was maybe, 5,000 words or something a chapter. And I would get done writing. And I'm like, yeah, that's how we do this. And it would be 2,000 words. And so it really forced me to slow down and to think about what are these actual steps. I would, in some of the cases, I would have to just stop and like think back to how did I feel about this? What did my clients feel about this? It really forced me to slow down, which also kind of creates some anxiety because I had a deadline. So it's like, oh my gosh, I have to slow down to write enough words, but I also have to do it fast enough to hit a deadline. But it also gave me like our own vocabulary for the things that we were doing. So I could explain to someone, this is how we want to set up a case plan, but the term investigative priority came out of writing the book. So now we can explain that to clients. Before we would call it client concerns or something, but now we have this definition of what is an investigative priority, and just really cleaning up the language of what we were talking about so that we can communicate that well with clients, their attorneys, and even other investigators.
Yeah, I think I had an experience this morning in a conference room with two other private investigators and some attorneys and assistants and clients. And everybody's using words and they think they know what those words mean, but not everybody in the room agrees on the meaning of the word. So there's a lot of miscommunication going along. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing. So any good journalist, a journalist worth their salt, is and investigators as well are going to ask this question near the end of the interview. What I missed? What should I have asked you that I didn't ask?
Well, I think this is a fantastic interview. So thank you so much. But I think um, maybe just one thing I would add that's a little bit more granular than what we've talked about is that I think it's like chapters 7 through 10. Yeah, 7 through 10. I actually talk about very specific data processing techniques and steps. I talk about how to keep that information organized, some of the different tools we use for document inventory. I mean, when we're talking about a financial investigation, we're talking about a lot of documents. In fact, when I was interning with the Bureau, they would ask me to go on searches for white collar investigations because I would dig through paper. You know, who wants to go dig through paper on a search warrant, right? So they'd take me. But so there's a lot of paper involved or data involved now. I mean, I don't actually go pick up paper very often anymore. But uh, so I talk about that. I then talk about fundamental analyses that we run that you can actually run in Excel. And on our YouTube channel, we actually show people how to run a lot of these. I talk about some of the most common ways to find fraud within these different types of data. So there's really specific chapters. When I gave my mom a copy of the book, I said, just read the first couple of chapters and the last chapter because she's not uh she totally would get it, but you know, it's not her thing. So that's more story focused, but the middle chapters are intentionally really detailed, uh, trying to provide someone with, okay, this is how I can approach these cases. And I think what's a little challenging sometimes, especially for accountants who read this book or attend our trainings about this process, is that they want to rely so heavily on accounting records, and accounting records are only as good as people have entered them. And so really getting that mind shift of I can be confident that bank statements, credit card statements, and payroll reports actually give me the information I need, and then how that pairs with accounting records. I like to say that those source information, so bank statement, credit card statement, payroll reports, that's your data. That's what calculates your loss. The accounting records, when you're dealing with a business embezzlement, that's your story. That's where you can find out, oh, all of these business suits or meals or, expense reimbursements that didn't actually exist. They weren't real. They were all coded to something else. That's what tells the story. They were deleted and you can see that on an audit trail. So that's probably the only thing I would add, but
Yeah. And here's the thing, in an hour-long webinar, I just don't think it's possible to dive down into the minutia.
gosh,
But
no.
but for those of you in the crowd, and there are a number of folks in the room today that have any interest in learning about this kind of investigation, go pick up. I'm going to go to the clean screen of me so I can show the book cover again. Um, Data Sleuth, Using Data in Forensic Accounting Engagements and Fraud Investigations by Leah Wietholter. Go pick up a copy of this book today if you have any interest in that kind of stuff at all. Leah, thank you so much for being here today. I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I've enjoyed the heck out of the chat. I know Kim has enjoyed getting to know you over the past several weeks in the email. So tell us real quick, where can people get your book?
Yeah, it's definitely available on Amazon, but if you go to workmanforensics.com, there's a pop-up as soon as you visit the website that'll then take you to Amazon. But Amazon's the easiest way to get it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And that is it from the Pursuit Magazine PI Education monthly-ish webinar. Leah, thanks again for joining us, and everyone, thank you for being here. We will catch you next time.